good morning, good afternoon, or good night. And welcome to the Narrated Bible. Before we climb this mountain, tap like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Your voice helps this story find other hearts that need hope. The mountain did not speak at dawn. It waited under a sky washed in gray and silver, as if the world held its breath. Abraham rose before the first bird called. Sand clung to his feet, and the cold edge of morning pressed against his skin. He stood at the mouth of the tent and listened to the kind of silence that follows a command, the kind that does not argue, the kind that walks inside. The oil lamp burned low. Isaac slept, shoulders rising and falling with the slow rhythm of youth. The boy had his mother's gentleness in his eyes and his father's steadiness in his steps. Abraham watched him for a long time, and the years ran through his mind like water through stone. The promise under the stars, the laughter of impossible birth, the long road of waiting that had taught him how to breathe when heaven seemed late. He stepped outside and lifted his face to the wind. He did not ask why, he did not ask how. The prayer that left his chest was simple and heavy at once. Lord, lead my feet where my heart cannot bear to go. Then he began to move. He woke the servants, saddled the donkey, and gathered wood that would one day tell a story none of them could yet understand. When Isaac stirred, he smiled the way sons do when fathers are near. Abraham laid a hand on his shoulder, a father's blessing pressed into muscle and bone. We leave at first light, he said with a calm that came from somewhere deeper than strength. The boy nodded, trusting what he could not see. He tied the water skin, adjusted his belt, and shouldered a bundle of timber. The firepot glowed faintly in Abraham's hand, the knife hidden beneath the folds of his robe. They set out across the low hills, the tent growing small behind them. The earth smelled of dust and time. The sky warmed from iron to pearl to gold. Their shadows stretched long on the ground, two lines pointing toward a summit that still wore night like a cloak. Isaac walked in step with his father. He had learned his stride from this man, the way of steady feet and quiet answers. By mid-morning, they passed a stand of terebinths where shepherds called to their flocks. The road narrowed between rock and scrub, and wind rose from the ravines like a sigh. The servants carried the heavier wood in silence. They had traveled with Abraham enough to know when words would be misplaced. Faith can make a man speak, but it can also make him very still. At noon, they rested in the shade of a low ridge. Abraham divided bread, and they ate without hurry. Isaac listened to the faint buzz of insects and the far bleat of goats, ordinary sounds that made the day feel simple. He watched his father's hands, hands that knew how to build altars and dig wells and hold a promise without crushing it. He did not know why they traveled, but he knew who he was traveling with, and that was enough. They rose and moved again, the mountain taller now, its bones of stone pressing through the soil. Clouds formed in thin sheets, and the light softened, turning the world to honey and ash. Abraham measured his breath, one pace and another, a liturgy of steps. He remembered the first night God had pointed him toward the unknown, the sky a bowl of sparks, the sand cold as truth. He remembered the laughter that had filled the tent when a barren womb finally answered the promise. He remembered the weight of the boy he now walked beside, the long-awaited laughter laid in his arms. When the sun leaned west, Abraham stopped. He looked ahead, then back. Here, he said to the servants, his voice firm but gentle, wait with the donkey. The boy and I will go there to worship, and we will return to you. He placed the remaining wood on Isaac's shoulders and took the fire and the knife. The words "we will return" held fast in his mouth like a stake in the ground. They were not bravado, they were faith. Father and son climbed the spine of Moriah alone. The air thinned, and the wind learned a sharper tongue. Loose stones clicked beneath their sandals, a small music that counted the steps. Isaac glanced at the bundle on his back and at the firepot in his father's hand. The question formed the way dawn forms, slow and certain. He let it live on his tongue for a while, before giving it to the air. My father, he said at last, careful and respectful. We have the fire, and we have the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering? The words did not accuse, they searched. They reached for the place where sons and fathers meet between what is known and what is trusted. Abraham did not answer quickly. He let the silence do its work. Then he turned. And in his eyes, there was a depth that comes only from years of walking with God. God himself will provide the lamb, my son. The sentence carried no ornament and no tremor. It walked ahead of them like a path none could see, but both could follow. They went on together. The phrase etched itself into the stones. Together when the hill rose, together when the air cooled, together when the wind pressed against their faces. faces? Faith is never a solitary word, even when it feels alone. It moves in pairs, the voice that calls and the heart that answers, the hand that leads and the step that obeys. Near the summit, the ground opened to a small level of bare rock. It was a place that remembered altars. The sky widened, a high blue bowl with edges of fire, and the world below fell away into quiet valleys. Abraham set down the fire pot and began to gather stones. He did not rush. He chose them the way a priest chooses words, carefully, reverently, knowing that the shape of the altar matters because the one who meets us there is holy. Isaac lowered the wood and watched. He had seen his father build many altars. Each time, the stones were patient and the hands were steady. This time the steadiness felt heavier, like a man lifting more than weight. When the last stone found its place, Abraham arranged the wood with slow precision, crossing timber over timber, leaving space for fire and for mystery. The wind paused. Even the insects seemed to step back from the edge of sound. Abraham turned to his son. There are moments that cannot be softened by explanations. There are moments that must be met by trust. Isaac looked into his father's face and saw sorrow that did not shake and love that did not run. He nodded. A young man old enough to understand one thing, that obedience sometimes looks like surrender, and that surrender can be a door. Abraham tied the cords with hands that trembled and did not fail. He laid Isaac on the wood, the boy's breath steady, the father's breath broken into pieces. He reached for the knife. Metal caught the light, a thin shard of sun held in flesh and bone. He lifted his arm, and time gathered itself into a single point where heaven meets the will of a man. The mountain leaned forward. The air did not move. If this story is speaking to you, pause for a heartbeat and share this video with someone who needs courage. Your share may place hope on another mountain. Abraham's hand held the future in its grip. The journey had led to this edge, where love and obedience looked like the same word spelled with tears. He drew a breath, and the breath tasted of dust and salt and promise. Then, at the edge of motion, when the world could not bear another heartbeat of waiting, something greater than sound moved through the air. It was not thunder that stopped him. It was not wind or stone. It was a voice calm as mercy, firm as eternity, that spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. Abraham, Abraham. The name echoed through him like light through water. Here I am, he answered, the knife frozen mid-air, every muscle trembling between obedience and relief. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not harm him in any way. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. The knife fell from his fingers, landing among the stones with a sound that broke the spell of silence. He exhaled, and the mountain exhaled with him. His knees weakened, and he fell forward, his hands gripping the altar, as if holding on to life itself. Isaac's eyes opened wide, the trust still unbroken, and Abraham touched his face with the gentleness of a man who has seen death step aside. The echo of that voice still rang in his chest, each syllable a wave of grace. When God speaks, even the wind listened. Behind him, a rustling in the thicket caught his ear. He turned and saw a ram caught by its horns in the dense branches. The animal struggled gently, trapped but unhurt, its wool glinting in the sun. Abraham's eyes filled again, but this time with something new, awe, reverence, and a dawning understanding of divine exchange. The Lord will provide, he whispered, the words barely leaving his lips. He took the ram, freed it from the thorns, and placed it upon the altar in place of his son. Smoke rose in a spiral, curling into the sky like a thread of forgiveness, and the scent of sacrifice filled the air. Isaac watched his father move slow, deliberate, reverent. He saw how tears mixed with the ashes on his father's hands, how worship looked like surrender, how love could be both a wound and a healing in the same breath. The boy's heart beat fast, not from fear but from awe. He understood, as few men ever do, what it meant to trust when nothing made sense. As the flames burned low, Abraham placed a hand on his son's shoulder and looked toward the sky that had commanded, tested, and spared. He said quietly, "The Lord will provide." And that name, Jehovah Jireh, became the name of that mountain forever. The clouds moved aside, and light poured down the slope like liquid gold. They stood there a long time, father and son, letting the warmth settle on their skin. No words were needed. What had been demanded had also been returned, transformed into something higher. Faith purified by fire, love proven through obedience, life restored by grace. Every heartbeat was a thank you. Every breath was a hymn. When Abraham finally turned away from the altar, he looked older, but lighter, as though he had left something behind on the stone. He helped Isaac down from the ledge, their hands still shaking slightly from what they had just survived. The boy held the knife in one hand and the ashes in his eyes, understanding that some memories would never fade, and should not. The air was different now. It was no longer heavy with testing, but alive with peace. They descended the mountain in silence, side by side, to shadows lengthening toward home. At the base of the mountain, the servants waited. They had watched smoke rise against the horizon and wondered if they should climb, but something had kept them rooted, a fear, perhaps, or reverence for the unseen. When they saw Abraham and Isaac returning together, relief flooded their faces. The master and the boy walked slowly, their clothes dusted with the color of sacrifice, their eyes brighter than before. Abraham lifted a hand, a simple gesture, meaning everything. "We will go home. The Lord has done as he promised." As they loaded the donkey and gathered their supplies, Isaac glanced once more at the mountain peak, disappearing behind the clouds. He did not yet know that this story, his story, would echo through eternity. He did not know that another father one day would walk a similar road and stop at a different moment. Not with a ram, but with a son. He only knew that God had spoken and that his life was spared. When they reached the foothills, Abraham paused and built another small altar, not of command, but of gratitude. He stacked only a few stones, lit only a small flame, and prayed not for answers, but for remembrance. He thanked the God who tests not to break but to build, who asks not to wound but to reveal, who calls men to climb only so they might see. If this story has reached your heart, take a second to like this video and share it with someone who needs faith restored. It helps this message find another soul that may be walking their own mountain in silence. That night, as the stars filled the sky once more, Abraham sat outside his tent and looked toward the same heavens where his promise had begun. The stars had not changed, but he had. He now knew what it meant to trust without reason, to obey without seeing, and to receive without deserving. The voice that once tested him now rested within him, and as Isaac slept beside the dying embers of their fire, the old man whispered into the night, "The Lord provides, always." The journey back stretched long and quiet beneath the burning sky. Dust rose beneath each step, curling into thin trails that drifted and vanished behind them. Neither father nor son spoke much. The weight of what had happened was too sacred to name, too vast to fit into ordinary words. There are moments in a man's life that divide everything into before and after, and this was one of them. For Abraham, every sound, the creak of the saddle, the crunch of gravel, the rhythmic breath of the donkey, seemed like part of a hymn that only heaven could hear. Isaac walked beside him, his young face calm but thoughtful. He did not carry fear, he carried revelation. He had seen the fire of obedience, the mercy that arrives at the last heartbeat, and the eyes of a father who would give everything for the God who had given him everything. Something in him had changed forever. He looked up at the sky, at the endless arch of blue and light, and felt that same invisible presence watching them, not from above, but from within. The air itself seemed alive with promise. They reached the place where the servants waited. The two men rose from the shade, astonished that both master and son were returning together. They bowed low, their faces lined with the tension of long waiting. Abraham spoke softly, almost in a whisper, "The Lord has provided." That was all he said, but the servants felt the truth ripple through them. They saw it in his eyes, the depth of peace that no man can fake, the quiet fire that burns only in those who have walked through obedience and come out whole. They resumed the road toward Beersheba, a place whose name means well of the oath. Each mile felt like a return to the beginning, but also a step into something entirely new. Abraham's steps were slower now, yet lighter. The knife at his belt no longer symbolized burden, but testimony. Every time it brushed against his side, it whispered, "You trusted," and he answered. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and olive trees, the ordinary beauty of a world that keeps turning, even after miracles. That night, they camped near a small stream. The stars came out one by one, like witnesses taking their places in the sky. Isaac lay on his back, watching them flicker, each one a spark of the promise his father had spoken of since he could remember. He turned to Abraham, his voice small in the vastness of the night. "Father," he said, "was it hard to hear his voice like that?" Abraham turned, the firelight carving lines of shadow and gold across his face. "Son, it is not hard to hear his voice. It is hard to trust that what he says will lead to life when it first sounds like loss." Isaac nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. The two of them sat in silence, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty, a silence that holds God. Before dawn, Abraham rose and built a small altar of uncut stones. He laid no sacrifice upon it this time, only lifted his hands and thanked the Lord for the lesson no man ever wants to learn, but every man must. He prayed for strength to pass this faith to his son, not the kind that waits for blessings, but the kind that obeys in the dark. The light broke over the horizon, turning the world from gray to gold, and the first bird sang. It was a new day, and it belonged to God. When they reached Beersheba, Abraham's household came running. The women wept to see Isaac safe. The men embraced their master with joy and awe. News travels quickly, even without words, and soon every tent in the camp whispered of the miracle on the mountain. Some marveled at God's mercy, others trembled at his demand, but Abraham said nothing of the details. He carried the story in his heart like a flame under glass, precious, untouchable, meant to burn quietly. Days passed. The rhythms of life resumed. Herds tended, wells dug, bread baked, laughter returning to the camp. Yet sometimes, when the evening wind blew from the east, Abraham would stop and look toward the distant outline of Moriah. He would stand there a long time, remembering the silence before the voice, the knife above the altar, the light that broke it all apart. Isaac would sometimes stand beside him, both saying nothing, both knowing that on that mountain, they had not only met God, they had been remade by him. One afternoon, as Abraham sat beneath a tamarisk tree, he noticed Isaac helping a young shepherd repair a broken fence. He watched the patience in his son's movements, the kindness that flowed from him effortlessly. It reminded him of something divine, not the fire of command, but the gentleness that follows understanding. He smiled, knowing the boy would grow into a man shaped not by fear but by faith, and perhaps that was the real offering God had wanted all along, a heart willing to trust, a son who would walk in his father's faith and go even further. That night, the Lord spoke again, not through thunder, not through angels, but in the quiet knowing of Abraham's spirit. Because you have obeyed me and have not withheld your son, I will bless you beyond measure. Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars and as countless as the sand on the seashore. Through your seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. Tears filled Abraham's eyes. The promise he once doubted now beat like a second heart within him. Every sacrifice had been seen. Every step had been counted. He bowed his head and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for remembering dust." If you are watching this and carrying your own weight up the mountain, know this: he sees you too. You are not forgotten. Every step you take in faith is a stone in your own altar of trust. Click like, subscribe, and share this video so others can find hope in their climb too. Your faith might be the voice someone else has been waiting to hear. Seasons turned. Isaac grew strong, his laughter echoing through the tents just as it had when he was born. Abraham grew older, but peace had settled on him like a cloak. The man who once walked into the unknown with trembling hands now walked with steady feet, content to follow the quiet will of his Creator. He no longer needed signs or dreams. The mountain had taught him that obedience is its own miracle, and trust its own reward. Years later, when Abraham would tell his grandchildren stories by the fire, he always ended them the same way. He would lift his eyes to the stars, that endless ocean of light, and say, each one of those lights began with a promise. And when they asked which one was his favorite, he would smile and point to the brightest, whispering, "That one shines over Moriah." And though none of them understood fully what happened there, they could feel it. The echo of mercy, the weight of faith, the beauty of obedience that stops just short of heartbreak because God steps in. As sleep took the old man that night, a soft wind brushed through the camp, carrying the scent of cedar and dust. Some said it was the breath of the mountain, still whispering, "The Lord will provide." Others said it was the voice of angels keeping watch. But Abraham, half between waking and dreaming, simply smiled. He had heard that voice before, and he knew it always came in time. The stars burned steady above him, the same ones he had counted years ago when faith was young and fear was loud. Now, faith was quiet, and it was enough. Above the mountain, before the dawn of that terrible morning, heaven itself had fallen silent. Angels stood still in their ranks, their wings lowered, their light dimmed in reverence. They had watched men rise and fall, empires burn and bloom, seas part and stars be born. But never had they seen faith stretch this far. From the throne of eternity, the Lord looked upon his servant Abraham, and in the vast silence between heaven and earth, even the stars seemed to wait for his word. Every breath on that mountain echoed through eternity. One angel, radiant and trembling, whispered to another, "He loves his son beyond all things, yet he does not withhold him." What kind of love is this? The elder among them answered softly, "It is the love that reflects the image of the one who created him. Even now, it is teaching the world what redemption will one day cost." On earth, Abraham's feet pressed into the dust of Moriah. In heaven, the feet of angels pressed into clouds of gold, watching. Each step he took was marked by divine attention. The knife glinted under the sun, but God's hand was already above it. Before steel could meet flesh, mercy had already written a different ending. Faith is never tested for God to learn what we are. It is tested for us to discover who he is. And on that mountain, all creation learned that obedience could break a heart and still not destroy it. When the ram cried from the thicket, a sound no louder than a heartbeat, angels rejoiced. It was a note of mercy, the same note that would one day sound from a cross on another hill. The son would not be spared, but because of him, every son and daughter could be. The mountain of Moriah became the shadow of Calvary, a prophecy written not with ink, but with faith and tears. Heaven saw the pattern being woven one thread of trust at a time. As the smoke from the altar rose, angels watched it twist upward, a column of fragrance and fire. It reached the edge of eternity, and the Lord said, "This is the scent of obedience. It pleases me more than the blood of rams or the songs of choirs." Abraham's faith had opened a gate between heaven and earth. Through that gate would one day walk a Savior born of Abraham's line, clothed in humility, carrying the fulfillment of every promise spoken under those stars. Back on the mountain, Abraham wiped the ashes from his hands and looked at his son. Isaac's eyes were wide, reflecting both fear and wonder, but deeper than that was understanding. He had glimpsed something sacred, something only those who stand on the edge of sacrifice can see, that obedience is not the end of love, but its highest form. The boy's heart was young, but his faith had already grown old. Rooted in the soil of trust his father had tilled before him. He would remember this mountain forever, not as a place of terror, but as the day he learned what it means to belong wholly to God. That evening, as shadows stretched long over the plains, Abraham's household gathered for prayer. Servants stood quietly in the glow of oil lamps, the sound of the wind moving through the tent like a song. Isaac sat beside his father, his hands still smelling faintly of smoke and cedar. Abraham spoke not of fear, nor of testing, but of provision. "The Lord will provide," he said again, his voice steady, his eyes wet with memory. And everyone listening felt the weight of those words settle deep into their hearts. It was no longer a story of command and obedience, but a revelation of who God truly is, the one who asks for trust only to return life 100-fold. In heaven, the Lord smiled, for the covenant was sealed, not by blood alone, but by faith. He turned to his angels and said, "Through this man's seed, I will bless every nation. They will forget my face and chase after idols, but I will not forget them. From this line will come my word made flesh. And when the day comes that my own son walks the road of sacrifice, the world will understand what love truly means. The mountain that saw obedience will one day watch redemption." Meanwhile, on earth, the world continued in its rhythm, flocks grazing, rivers winding, children laughing. No one but Abraham and Isaac knew how close heaven had come to touching the soil that day. But creation felt it in its bones. The wind carried whispers of it across valleys. The stars burned brighter that night, as if remembering their part in the promise. Faith had stretched across dimensions, binding the mortal to the divine. Abraham's tent became a place of quiet worship. Every morning he prayed facing east toward the mountain that had changed everything. And though his hair turned white and his steps slowed, his heart never grew weary. When he prayed now, there was no trembling, only peace. He no longer asked for signs or promises. He had seen enough to know that every word God speaks is alive, even when it seems silent. One night, Isaac approached him by the fire. "Father," he said softly, "will God ever ask something like that again?" Abraham looked into the flames, the light flickering across his weathered withered face. "Yes," he said, "one day he will ask it of himself." Isaac frowned, not understanding, but Abraham smiled gently, as if he could already see across centuries. "He will give his son, and this time the knife will not stop. And when it is done, every heart that believes will be set free. Heaven will weep, but the earth will rejoice." Isaac was silent. The fire cracked, and the stars shimmered overhead, as though heaven itself had nodded in agreement. That night, Isaac dreamed of a cross standing on a far hill. He did not understand it, but when he awoke, his heart felt strangely full, like the echo of something eternal. If you're still with us in this story, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Your words connect this message to someone who might need it tonight. And if your faith feels small, remember, so did Abraham's once. But a small flame, when placed in God's hands, can set the whole night sky on fire. Far above them, in the unseen realms, angels still spoke of that mountain. They called it the place where love was measured and mercy triumphed. And they waited for the day when another son would climb another hill with wood on his back, while the world watched in silence, not knowing that this time, the sacrifice would not be stopped. It was the echo of Moriah, rippling through eternity. In that moment, heaven and earth were forever bound by one truth, that faith is not about understanding why, but trusting who. And when we walk where we are called, even when it breaks us, the Lord still provides. Years passed, like drifting sand. The tents of Abraham's camp spread wide under the sun, each one a heartbeat of the promise fulfilled. The laughter of children echoed through the hills where once there had been only silence. Abraham grew older, his face lined not just by age, but by the weight of memory, of mountains climbed, of altars built, of prayers that had reshaped history. The world around him kept changing, but his heart stayed anchored to one unshakable truth: the Lord provides. Every sunrise reminded him of that mountain, and every sunset felt like a whisper of the same mercy that had once spared his son. Isaac grew tall, his shoulders strong, his voice calm and steady like his father's. The boy who had once lain on the altar was now a man, shaped by peace and patience. He carried no bitterness, only wonder, the quiet understanding that faith, when lived, becomes inheritance. He had seen his father pray, weep, wait, and trust. And though the years ahead would test him in different ways, the same God who had spoken on Moriah would walk beside him too. The story of faith was far from over. It had simply changed hands. Abraham watched Isaac with pride and hope. He knew the promise would continue through him, though the path would not always be smooth. One evening, under the same stars that had once marked the covenant, Abraham took his son aside. They sat near the fire, the light dancing on their faces, the night deep and still. Abraham's voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from awe. "My son," he said, "you have seen the fire of God's testing. But know this, the test is never meant to destroy us. It is meant to reveal what cannot be taken away." Isaac listened closely, his eyes fixed on the flame. Abraham continued, "When I was young, I thought faith was a road of answers. I now know it is a road of trust. Answers fade, but trust endures." The words fell into the night like seeds into fertile soil. After that evening, something in Isaac shifted. He began to rise before dawn to pray as his father did. He would walk alone into the fields, letting the morning light wash over him, speaking quietly with the God who had once stopped his father's hand. The same silence that had terrified him as a boy now comforted him as a man. He understood that God was not always loud. Sometimes his greatest miracles arrived, disguised as waiting. In time, Abraham passed from this world as gently as a flame flickering out at dawn. He had lived full of days, surrounded by promise and peace. Isaac buried him near the cave of Machpelah, beside Sarah, his mother. There were tears, yes, but not of despair. It was the mourning of one who knew that the story was not ending, only turning a page. Isaac stood by the tomb long after the others had left. He placed his hand on the stone and whispered, "You trusted until the end. I will do the same." The wind rose, warm and soft, as if the mountain itself had heard and blessed his vow. Years later, famine came again to the land, just as it had in his father's time. The earth cracked under the sun, and the rivers shrank into narrow veins of dust. People murmured of leaving, of finding food in Egypt, as Abraham once had. Isaac packed his things, ready to follow the same path. But before he could go, the Lord appeared to him in the night. The voice was the same that had spoken to his father, full of calm power. "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land where I tell you to stay. Live here, and and I will bless you. I am the God of your father Abraham." The air around him shimmered with a peace beyond reason. "I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars and give them all these lands. Through your seed, all nations on earth will be blessed." Isaac fell to his knees. The covenant had not faded with his father's death. It was alive, and now it rested on him. He obeyed. He stayed in the land even when logic said to flee. He sowed seed in the cracked soil, and the ground yielded 100-fold. Neighbors mocked him at first, then marveled. The same God who had stopped a knife now made dry earth bloom. Faith, once again, proved stronger than fear, but with blessing came jealousy. The Philistines grew envious of Isaac's prosperity. They filled his wells with dirt, the same wells his father had dug years before. Each time they destroyed one, Isaac moved and dug another. He refused to fight, refused to curse, refused to give up. Patience had become his weapon, peace his rebellion. When they asked him why he did not resist, he answered softly, "The Lord gave the water once. He can give it again," and he did. At each new well, fresh water flowed, a silent miracle repeating itself. That night, as Isaac sat beside his servants, he told them the story of Moriah. He spoke of the fire, the wood, the trembling hands, and the mercy that descended at the last second. He told them of his father's faith, a faith that built altars instead of arguments, that climbed mountains instead of asking for maps. The men listened with awe. When he finished, he looked at them and said, "If you remember one thing, let it be this: God is never too late. His silence is never absence. His timing is always mercy." The camp fell quiet. Only the sound of the wind moving through the grass remained a soft echo of those ancient words. The Lord will provide. Isaac's story, like his father's, became a living thread in the tapestry of promise. He too built altars. He too waited for answers. He too found God faithful. Through him, the line of blessing continued, stretching forward into ages he could not yet see. Each prayer he whispered under the stars was a seed planted for generations to come. If you are listening to this story tonight, know that faith is not about heroes or perfect men. It is about ordinary hearts that keep believing when everything looks empty. Like Abraham, like Isaac, like you, faith is the bridge between despair and deliverance. So, if you're standing in the middle of your own drought, keep digging. The water is coming. Isaac's wells still stand in the deserts of history, not as monuments of wealth, but as reminders of trust. Every drop of water that rose from those stones testified that God remembers, and somewhere beyond the veil of time, Abraham's laughter still echoes in the heavens, the laughter of a man who dared to believe the impossible and found that God had been faithful all along. That night, Isaac dreamed of his father. He saw Abraham standing on the mountain again, the ram still caught in the thicket, the fire still burning low, but this time, when the old man turned to him, there was no knife in his hand, only a promise shining in his eyes. "Carry it forward," Abraham said. "Tell them he provides." And as the dream faded, Isaac woke with tears on his face and peace in his heart. The sun was rising, the sky golden over the hills of Gerar. He stood, took a deep breath, and whispered, "The Lord will provide, then, now, and forever." The story did not end with Abraham or Isaac. Faith, once awakened, does not die. It travels. It moved through generations like a whisper in the blood, from father to son, from heart to heart. It crossed deserts, kingdoms, and centuries, waiting for the moment when the promise would finally take flesh. Every altar built, every prayer whispered, every tear shed in trust was leading to a single hill that would one day rise outside Jerusalem. The same God who had stopped the knife on Moriah was preparing to hold it still. No longer for his own son would take the place of the ram. In heaven, time folds differently. To the angels, Moriah and Calvary were two sides of the same mountain, separated only by mercy. They remembered Abraham's trembling hands and saw them echoed in the hands of a Roman carpenter centuries later, nailed to a wooden beam. The wood was different, but the love was the same. The Son of God would walk the road Abraham once feared to finish, not because his father had turned away, but because his father's love had gone further than anyone could imagine. And so, the promise came full circle. Isaac had carried the wood for the offering, unaware that one day another son would carry his own cross. The same silence that fell over Moriah fell again over Golgotha, a silence heavy with sorrow and purpose. On both mountains, a father watched his son. On Moriah, God stopped the sacrifice. On Calvary, he fulfilled it. There, the knife did not stop, but grace flowed where blood once should have fallen. What Abraham had been spared from, the Lord himself endured. The pattern of redemption was complete. The heavens wept, the earth trembled. The veil in the temple tore from top to bottom, as if the very fabric between heaven and earth could no longer separate love from its creation. It was finished, but it was also beginning. The God who had once provided a ram now provided himself. The fire that Abraham built on stones now burned in every heart that believed. Generations later, people would look back at Abraham's faith and call it madness. How could a father be willing to offer his son? But heaven saw it differently. It was not madness, it was prophecy. It was the divine rehearsal of what would come, the reflection of a father who would not spare his own son, but deliver him for the redemption of all. And that son, the descendant of Abraham, the seed of promise, would rise from the grave 3 days later, the final proof that the Lord truly provides. Isaac's descendants would grow into a nation. Kings and prophets would come and go. Some would remember the covenant, others would forget, but the line remained unbroken, stitched together by grace. From the tents of Abraham to the cradle of Bethlehem, the story moved forward, unstoppable. Unstoppable as light. When Mary held her child in that small town under the same starlit sky, Abraham once counted, she was cradling the fulfillment of every promise whispered under heaven. The word had become flesh. The voice that spoke from the whirlwind now spoke with a heartbeat. And yet, even after all the centuries, the lesson remained the same. God does not ask for sacrifice because he desires pain. He asks for surrender because only in letting go do we receive what cannot be lost. Abraham had to climb a mountain to see it. Isaac had to lay on the altar to feel it. And we only have to believe it. That faith, small as a seed, is what moves mountains still. So when life tests you, when the climb feels steep and your heart feels heavy, remember Moriah. Remember that every step Abraham took upward was guided by unseen mercy. Remember that just beyond the hardest obedience lies the sweetest provision. He does not ask you to walk alone. He walks with you, as he walked with Abraham, as he walked with his son. Every silence has meaning. Every waiting season has purpose. Every tear that falls on the climb becomes part of your altar of faith. If you're still here, watching, listening, let this story reach the quiet corners of your heart. Maybe you've been carrying your own burden up the hill, wondering if God still sees you. He does. He always has. The same God who called Abraham by name calls you by yours. And when the moment comes that feels like the end, remember, that is where resurrection begins. Faith does not erase pain, but it transforms it. It takes the knife from your hand and turns it into testimony. The night fell soft on the land once promised to Abraham. The stars, the same stars that had heard the covenant, burned bright over generations yet to come. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of that divine whisper moving through the ages. I will bless you, and through you, all nations shall be blessed. That blessing is not a memory, it's alive, living in every heart that dares to trust when the sky is silent. The story of Abraham and Isaac is not about loss. It is about love. It is about the heart of God reaching through time to show us that every sacrifice made in faith is a seed that blooms in eternity. The ram in the thicket was only the beginning. The true lamb was yet to come. And when he did, he took every shadow of fear and turned it into light. From that day, the fire of Moriah has never gone out. It burns still in every prayer, in every act of trust, in every heart that whispers, the Lord will provide. So as you go, carry this truth with you. The mountain you fear to climb may be the place God reveals himself most clearly. The altar you dread to build may become the doorway to your miracle. And the silence you mistake for abandonment may be the moment heaven is holding its breath, ready to speak your name. This is Asterisk, the Narrated Bible Asterisk. Episode 4, Asterisk the Mountain, where love was tested, Asterisk. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and share it so the word continues to reach those who need to remember that God still provides. May your faith rise like Abraham's, your hope endure like Isaac's, and your heart rest in the promise that never fades. For the same God who stopped the knife has never stopped loving you.